The season of Hajj is upon us. Eid al-Adha is right around the corner. And so we are reminded of the Prophet who brought us the Hajj rituals, who constructed the Kaaba, and who is recognized worldwide as a symbol of Tawheed, and that is Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. In Surah Al-Shu'ara, Allah Azza wa Jal gives a detailed account of Ibrahim's story. Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَاتْلُ عَلَيْهِمْ نَبَأَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ, and recite to them the news of Abraham. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not use the word naba unless this news is very important. Let's see what important things Allah Azza wa Jalla wants to teach us. إِذْ قَالَ لِأَبِيهِ وَقَوْمِهِ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ, when he said to his father and his people, what do you worship? قَالُوا نَعْبُدُ أَصْنَامًا فَنَظَلُّ لَهَا عَاكِفِينَ, they said to him, we worship idols. We are devoted to them. Ibrahim alayhi salam shows us right away 2 lessons for how to give da'wah to other people. But before we look at those 2 lessons, it should not be lost on anyone how important it is to give da'wah. Da'wah is the way of the prophets. Allah Azza wa Jalla said, قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ عَلَى بَصِيرَةٍ أَنَا وَمَنِ اتَّبَعَنِي وَسُبْحَانَ اللَّهِ وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Tell them, this is my way. I call to Allah with insight, me and those who follow me. Allah is exalted, and I am not one of the mushrikeen. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us that He raised up this ummah specifically so that we could give da'wah to others. وَلْتَكُنْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. And so that some of you would call others to good, commanding the known good and forbidding the evil. Those are the successful ones. Da'wah is the reason Allah Azza wa Jal brought us forth as a community and made us to spread all across the earth as Muslims. We were made for this. We were made for da'wah. Do you know how sad it is to have something that is made for a certain purpose, but instead it's used for something else? Imagine you had a race car, souped up, tricked out, the fastest race car around. What would be the point if it stayed in the driveway? What would be the point if you used it to go to the laundromat? It was built to race, and anything less than racing would be embarrassing. Islam was made to be spread, and Allah Azza wa Jal gave Muslims honor as long as they were spreading Islam. That doesn't mean life was always easy, but we had honor as long as we were making da'wah. Now, we have to understand. We have to understand what da'wah is. I don't mean standing on the street corner, handing out newspapers. I don't mean debating with everyone you come across. I don't mean diving into the comments section on social media. There might be a time and a place for those activities, but that's not the only way to do da'wah. That's not even the most important way to do da'wah. The most important way to do da'wah, especially in our time, is through your example. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتِمَّ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ, I was only sent to complete or to perfect excellent manners. That doesn't mean that Islam is limited to smiling or saying kind words. It means that when you fix your manners, all of them, your manners with Allah, your manners with the creation, when everything is in its proper place, that's when you are a living example of the Sharia in action. A living example of what Allah wants from human beings. Can a sick doctor heal his patients? If the doctor doesn't cure himself first, he might end up making his patients sick instead of healing them. If we want to do da'wah, we need to fix ourselves. And this doesn't mean that you can't have a good impact until you're a saint. No, but it does mean that people are going to first look at how you act and how you behave before they decide whether you're worth listening to or not. Ibrahim's example shows us that Dawah, just as Dawah isn't only about debating, the other extreme also isn't true. It's not only about fixing yourself. Sometimes there is a time for correction. Sometimes falsehood must be challenged, especially when falsehood is aggressive, especially when falsehood doesn't merely want to be tolerated, but when falsehood wants to take over and erase the truth entirely, or when falsehood wants to make it a crime to speak the truth. At that time, it's time for correction. It's time for courage. It's time to trust in Allah and call a spade a spade. Do you think Ibrahim alayhi salam doesn't already know the answer to his question? He asks them, what are you worshipping? His father makes those idols. Of course he knows the answer to this question. However, it's an important process point that Ibrahim is teaching us to verify things. To get people to admit to things instead of hurling accusations at them. If you start with accusations, the natural human reaction is to deny them and to get defensive. You've already indicated through your accusation, which probably had an angry tone, that you think that they did something that you do not like. This is a great way to encourage lying. I'll give you an example. Those of us with children, okay, listen up. We see something valuable in our house, something that costs a lot of money, and it gets broken. And it's fairly obvious that it was one of our children who broke it. What do? Do we storm into the room screaming at them, did you break this? What do you expect them to say? Yes. When you're boiling with anger, they would be afraid. They're going to find it too tempting to lie just to try to avoid your wrath. If you had been calm, if you had asked in an open-ended sort of way, you would have given your child the opportunity to practice being truthful, even if that truth is difficult. But since you let out your anger, and you let your anger take control, now you've made it difficult for them to be honest. This lesson has other applications for trickier situations. I'll give you an example. For those of you interested in aqidah, in theology, somebody says, Allah is above the creation. Another person says, Allah doesn't have any direction. Each of them becomes very upset with what the second one is saying. The second person says to the first, you're making tajseem. A'udhu billah. If you believe Allah has a direction, then you're saying He has a body, and if you're saying He has a body, then He's limited to the creation. This is kufr. And you're a kafir. The first person has a comeback ready. Oh, well, what about you? You're making ta'til. If you believe Allah doesn't have a direction, then you're basically saying that Allah doesn't exist, and that also is kufr. But if you ask the first person, do you really believe Allah is limited to a body? He would say, no way. And if you ask person number two, are you really saying that Allah doesn't exist? He would say, no way. As the scholars say, don't put words in people's mouths. You might think, well, you doing this means that. Maybe they don't agree. Maybe they need to be educated. Maybe they need to be convinced that you're right. Or maybe you're wrong. Asking an open-ended question like Ibrahim did helps make sure everyone's on the same page. It bridges the gap in case there's any misunderstanding. Ibrahim gives them a chance. He gives them a chance to clarify themselves. As if he's saying to them, are you guys really worshiping idols? And their reply is essentially, well, yes, in fact, that's exactly what we're doing. If they had denied it, then the situation would have called for a different approach entirely. Imagine if they had said, no, we're not actually worshiping them. We're doing this other thing instead. Then either Ibrahim alayhi salam has to convince them that what they're doing is worship, or he has to accept the fact that they're not really worshiping the idols at all. Once Ibrahim alayhi salam asked them in an open-ended way what they were doing, and after they confessed to doing what Ibrahim alayhi salam was concerned about, now it's time to talk. قَالَ هَلْ يَسْمَعُونَكُمْ إِذْ تَدْعُونَ. He said, do they hear you when you call out to them? أَوْ يَنْفَعُونَكُمْ أَوْ يَضُرُّونَ. Or do they benefit you? Or do they harm you at all? Again, notice Ibrahim's approach. Does he use threats? Does he tell them they're going to hell? Does he tell them that they had better believe because so-and-so said so? No. Ibrahim alayhi salam appeals to their reason. He appeals to their intellect. He compliments their intelligence by assuming that if they think about it, that they're going to agree with him. And Ibrahim, his questions, they revolve around three essential divine qualities. Three qualities that make worship make sense. If the thing that we are worshiping has these three qualities, then our worship makes sense. And if it doesn't, our worship is absolutely worthless. First, can it hear? Second, can it help you? And third, can it hurt you? Anything that can't hear, anything that can't help you, anything that can't harm you is a false god. And that does not deserve to be worshipped. These are the lessons that Allah Azza wa Jalla is trying to teach us through Ibrahim. Don't assume. Ask for clarification. Challenge falsehood, but with wisdom. And ask people to think for themselves. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله على إحسانه والشكر له على توفيقه وامتنانه وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له تعظيما لشأنه وأشهد أن نبينا وسيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله الداعي إلى رضوانه صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه وإخوانه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. We left off with Ibrahim alayhi salam challenging the idol worshippers. He is implying the things that you worship cannot hear you. They cannot help you. They cannot hurt you. And therefore they do not deserve your worship. Let's see how they respond. They said, but we found our fathers doing this. Is Allah Azza wa Jal just telling us a nice story? Or is he bringing this up for a reason? Didn't he know that 1400 years after the Prophet ﷺ, we would be here in Utica, New York, thinking about his words and thinking about this exact verse? This is a spiritual problem. This is a theological problem. This is a problem that affects every ethnic group, every nation, every group of people. The idea, the assumption that just because we did it this way yesterday means that we have to do it the same way today. The idea that just because we've done things like this for the past 100 years, we have to keep on doing them the same way for the next 100 years. The idea that just because my ancestors did it this way, I have to do it this way too. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no, not automatically, not unconditionally, not uncritically. You don't get a free pass just because that's the way things have always been. You have to be smarter than that. You have to be more critical than that. By the way, why do we care what our ancestors did? What does it have to do with you and me? I'll tell you, we take pride in our ancestors often, not always, but often, to feel good about ourselves even when we haven't done anything really that special. I can feel good about myself knowing that my ancestors were kings and queens and did this and did that. Okay, great. What have I done? This is when it becomes dangerous. This is when it becomes an excuse, an escape, and takes our focus off of doing good with our lives. It's like a shortcut to feeling worthy without putting in the work. And so if you have not put in the work, if you haven't done anything yourselves, but your sense of self-worth is all invested into your ancestors, it's going to be very, very difficult to change the harmful traditions that they had. Those traditions that they had will become the most sacred thing to you because you've put your ancestors up on such a high pedestal that to suggest that they might have been wrong will completely undermine your own sense of self-worth. Entire communities fall under this delusion. This is how we get to the point where communities defend horrifying practices and traditions. This is how it happens. If we go through the Muslim world, we will find many traditions and practices that are harmful, that are sinful, but we cling to them, and we won't give them up. I had a good friend from Kosovo who told me about one of these. On the wedding night, they take the groom before he goes alone with his bride, and they beat him up. They give him black eyes, they give him cuts, they give him bruises, and then they open the door to where the wife is waiting, and they put him in there and shut the door. The idea behind it is that every day after, the husband's going to look better and better and better. Some of our brothers from Central Asia have a tradition where they kidnap women when they want to get married. No dowry, no consent, no wali. This is completely against Islam. That's not even a valid marriage. And there are many, many other examples of these types of harmful traditions. Allah Azza wa Jal clarifies for us the proper role, the proper scope of tradition and respect for our ancestors. Yes, tradition can be good. Yes, tradition can be important and in line with the Sharia. But Allah Azza wa Jal is telling us that we can't be uncritical of it. We have to evaluate our traditions every once in a while. Do they continue to serve a purpose of the Sharia? Do they continue to please Allah? If the answer is no, it has to go. And if we don't make this intervention, if we don't critique our own traditions, if we don't keep the good ones and get rid of the bad ones, we run the risk of our children growing up here in North America rejecting all of it, the good and the bad. Back to Ibrahim. How does he respond to the confession of his people that they worship idols simply because that's their tradition? That's what they've always done. He said to them, do you see what you've been worshipping? You and your ancient forefathers. Indeed, they are enemies to me, except for the Lord of the worlds. Ibrahim alayhi salam is saying, it doesn't matter who is doing the action. That doesn't make it right or wrong. We can apply this across the board. Just because the wali, just because the imam, just because the president of the United States does it, it doesn't make it right. Just because your ancestors did it doesn't make it right. As we said, the truth is not known by men. Rather, men are known by the truth. And then Ibrahim alayhi salam, he shows us one final lesson for this week. He doesn't just say, well, that's a lovely tradition you have for yourselves. I'll be doing my own tradition over here. No. He says, your idols, your traditions are enemies to me. Ibrahim alayhi salam teaches us that it's not enough to just believe in Allah or believe in Islam. Part of that belief includes denying falsehood, rejecting false gods. Should that rejection be done with wisdom and good manners and reason? Yes, of course. But there has to be a rejection nonetheless. We can't give truth and falsehood equal status, even if we respect everybody. And the difference is, we don't believe that religion is just a personal choice. A little bit more significant than whether you want biryani or shawarma for dinner. No, this is about truth and falsehood. And issues of truth and falsehood affect everybody. The truth helps everyone, and falsehood hurts everyone. Don't we see what's going on in our schools today? Especially when June rolls around. Someone from our community reached out to me just this week, a good sister, a practicing Muslim. Her work asked her to change her Zoom background to a rainbow flag for June. She told me, this is against my faith, I don't want to do it. I told her, they can't force you to do it. Don't do it. When I'm at Hamilton College or some of the other colleges around here doing Dawah, they ask me to give my pronouns. I don't give them my pronouns. If I say my pronouns are he and him, it assumes that I have the power to choose for myself. And that is not what I believe. As a Muslim, I tell them, I don't believe I can choose my pronouns. I believe that my pronouns are given to me from the Creator. Falsehood will not rest. When falsehood has power, it will try to impose itself. It will try to wipe out the truth. That's why it's not enough to just love Islam or just love Allah. Allah tells us we also have to hate falsehood. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي فمن يكفر بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم. There's no compulsion when it comes to forcing someone to accept religion. The right course has been distinguished clearly from the wrong course. So whoever rejects false gods and believes in Allah, they have grasped onto the most trustworthy handhold. There's no breaking it. And Allah Azza wa Jal is hearing and knowing. This is the verse just after Ayat al-Kursi. And this verse is miraculous, because it starts out saying there's no compulsion in religion. We do not force anybody to become a Muslim. Abadan. Everyone has their free will to choose their faith. Great. However, at the same time, we have a responsibility as Muslims, the people of faith. Once we do believe, part of that belief is rejecting falsehood. And that doesn't mean persecution, and that doesn't mean violence, and that doesn't mean getting disrespectful or getting personal. But it does mean standing up with courage and saying, this is wrong. This practice is wrong. This action is wrong. This belief is wrong. I reject it. And if we're afraid of losing status, or we're afraid of losing honor from this society or from other people because of standing up for our beliefs, then Allah Azza wa Jal wants you to know that He controls the honor and that He controls the status. There is no status or honor except that Allah grants it to whom He wills. Taking that honor and status has to be based on pleasing Allah, not on pleasing the creation, whom Allah might have given them a little bit of honor and status just for a short amount of time. Obeying Allah Azza wa Jal and pleasing Him takes priority. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, "Man iltamasa rida Allahi bi sakhati nas radiyallahu anhu wa arda an-nas anhu. Wa man iltamasa rida an-nas bi sakhati Allah sakhata Allahu alayhi wa askhata alayhi an-nas." Whoever tries to please Allah with something that angers the people, they will end up pleasing Allah and the people. And whoever tries to please the people with something that angers Allah, Allah and the people will end up despising him. ثم صلوا وسلموا على النبي رحمة كما أمركم ربكم حيث قال إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين وأذل الشرك والمشركين ودمر أعداء الدين وانصر عبادك المؤمنين واجعل اللهم بلاد الإسلام آمنا مطمئنا يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصر إخواننا المستضعفين في كل مكان. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات يا سميع الدعوات. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل